The bell above the diner door jingled softly, the way it always did every morning at 7:30 a.m. But this morning, Emily felt a chill run down her spine the moment it rang. The sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, touching the cracked leather booths and the faint smell of coffee and buttered toast that hung in the air. She turned instinctively toward the sound and froze. Standing in the doorway were 4 tall men in black suits, their presence sharp and commanding, followed by 2 women holding leather briefcases. Everyone in the diner turned to look. But they weren't there for any of the regulars. They were there for the frail old woman sitting quietly in her usual corner booth. The same woman Emily had been serving breakfast to every single morning for the last 7 months. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, take a second to hit like, comment, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances. Because what you're about to hear is a story that proves that even the smallest act of care can change lives in ways you'd never imagine. The woman's name was Margaret, though Emily had only learned that much after weeks of quiet smiles and small talk. When Margaret first started coming to the diner, she looked like someone who had lost everything. Her clothes were always clean but worn, her hands trembling slightly as she held her cup of coffee. There was a tiredness in her eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from the kind of grief that clings to a person's soul long after the world has moved on. Emily was a waitress at Sunnyside Diner, a small family-run place tucked at the edge of town. She was in her mid-20s, working double shifts to pay off her mother's hospital bills. Life hadn't been kind to her either. Some days she could barely make rent. Other days she'd go home with aching feet and a forced smile. Yet something about Margaret always pulled at her heart. The first time the old woman walked in, she had ordered just a slice of toast and a cup of hot water. Emily noticed she didn't even have enough money to pay for a proper meal. Quietly, without saying a word, she added a pat of butter on the toast and filled her cup with tea instead of plain water. Margaret had looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes, as if she hadn't been shown kindness in a very long time. Day after day, Margaret returned, always at the same time, always to the same booth by the window. She'd stare outside at the morning traffic, her mind miles away, her wrinkled hands wrapped around that same chipped cup. And every day, Emily made sure her toast came with extra butter and her tea was served warm, even when Margaret didn't order it. Sometimes she'd sneak a small piece of pie onto the plate when the manager wasn't looking. Other times, she'd sit for a minute, pretending to refill sugar containers just so she could talk to her. Over time, they became something like family. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you stumble upon when both hearts are quietly breaking. One cold morning in November, Margaret didn't show up. Emily noticed immediately. The booth by the window looked painfully empty. The next day, still no Margaret. By the 3rd morning, Emily couldn't take it anymore. She asked around, but no one knew where the old woman lived. She realized then how little she actually knew about the person who had become such a constant in her life. She felt a strange ache in her chest, like she had lost someone dear without ever really knowing them. But on the 4th morning, Margaret returned. Her face was pale, and she looked weaker than before. She confessed softly that she had fallen ill and had no one to take care of her. Emily didn't hesitate. During her lunch break, she ran to the nearby pharmacy and bought medicine with her own money. She packed a small paper bag with soup from the diner and handed it to Margaret, saying it was just leftovers. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "No one's done something like this for me in years." From then on, Emily made it her mission to make Margaret's morning special. She'd start her shift a little earlier to make sure the booth was clean, the toast perfectly golden, and the tea steaming just right. Some customers teased her for caring too much, but Emily didn't mind. She knew what loneliness looked like, and she wasn't about to let Margaret feel it anymore. Months passed. Winter turned to spring, and their bond grew stronger. Margaret started smiling again, her laugh light and gentle. She'd tell Emily stories about her late husband who had been a lawyer, about the home she once had by the lake, and about how after his passing she had lost everything in a long legal battle. Emily never interrupted, never pitied her, she just listened. Sometimes that's all a person needs, someone to listen without judgment. Then came that morning, the one that changed everything. It started like any other day. Emily had just finished setting the tables when Margaret walked in, wearing her favorite black hat and coat. She looked radiant that day, like she was carrying a secret. She ordered her usual, toast with butter and tea. Emily brought it to her with a smile, and Margaret reached for her hand, holding it a moment longer than usual. There was something in her eyes, something deep and knowing. But before Emily could ask, the diner door opened, and in walked the men in suits. The entire room went silent. The bodyguards scanned the place before one of them stepped forward, asking quietly, "Mrs. Wallace?" The name didn't register at first, but when Margaret nodded, Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Wallace?" she repeated in her mind. That name belonged to one of the richest families in the city, known for their businesses, charities, and ironically for their long history of legal disputes. Margaret looked at Emily, her eyes shimmering. "I think I owe you an explanation," she said softly. "The lawyers stepped closer, carrying folders and documents, but Margaret raised her hand to stop them. "Not yet," she said firmly. "Let me speak." It turned out Margaret Wallace wasn't just any old woman. She was the widow of Charles Wallace, a multi-millionaire philanthropist. After her husband's death, their children had fought over the inheritance, leaving her isolated, heartbroken, and stripped of her dignity. She had walked away from the mansion, the wealth, and the chaos, choosing instead to live quietly on her pension, away from the greed and noise of her past life. For months, no one knew where she was, until that day. Margaret explained that she had hired a private investigator recently, not to find her family, but to find the people who had shown her genuine kindness when she had nothing. "And you," she said, looking straight into Emily's eyes, "showed me that kindness every single morning, expecting nothing in return." Emily stood frozen, her mind spinning. She didn't know what to say. The lawyers stepped forward again, this time handing Margaret a thick envelope. Margaret smiled faintly and slid it across the table toward Emily. "This is for you," she said. Emily shook her head, refusing. "I don't want anything," she whispered. But Margaret insisted. "You earned it," she said, her voice trembling. "You gave me back faith in humanity." Inside the envelope was a letter and a deed. Margaret had transferred ownership of the diner to Emily, completely, paid off, papers signed, everything. Emily's hand shook as she read the document, unable to believe what she was seeing. The woman she thought was poor, fragile, and alone had just changed her entire life in an instant. Margaret explained that she had been quietly observing Emily's struggles, the way she worked tirelessly, how she still smiled through exhaustion, how she helped others even when she had little herself. "You reminded me of who I used to be," she said, "and now it's my turn to give something back." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she hugged her tightly. The whole diner erupted into applause, the regulars standing up, clapping with wet eyes and warm smiles. For the first time in years, Emily felt like the world had noticed her heart, not just her work. A few days later, Margaret stopped by one last time. She looked peaceful, her smile radiant. She told Emily she was moving back to her old home, not to live among luxury, but to reopen her husband's charitable foundation. She wanted to use her remaining years to help others the way Emily had helped her. Before leaving, she pressed a small locket into Emily's hand. Inside was a tiny picture of a lake, and the words engraved, "Kindness is the wealth of the heart." Months passed again. The diner flourished under Emily's care. She hired more staff, repainted the walls, and renamed it Margaret's Place. Every morning, the corner booth remained reserved, with a small framed photograph of Margaret smiling in her black hat and a plate of toast with butter placed beside it. The townspeople often came not just for food, but for the story of a waitress who gave without expecting anything, and an old woman who returned that kindness 1,000-fold. Reporters wrote about it, but Emily never sought fame. All she wanted was to keep the spirit of kindness alive. Sometimes, late at night, when she'd close the diner and turn off the lights, she'd sit in that booth, sipping tea, whispering, "Thank you, Margaret." And though the seat beside her was empty, she always felt a quiet warmth in the air, as if Margaret never really left. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because the world needs more reminders that small acts of kindness can change lives in ways we may never see. Before you go, comment below. Have you ever helped someone expecting nothing in return, and it came back to you in an unexpected way? Because sometimes the simplest gestures, a smile, a cup of tea, a slice of toast, can become the start of something extraordinary. And when you give kindness freely, the universe always finds a way to bring it back to you.